Hey guys, what's up in this video? I'm going to compare the specs and features of the Sony Xperia T2 Ultra versus the Sony Xperia Z Ultra. So starting off from the display, we have a 6-inch display on the Sony Xperia T2 Ultra versus 6.4-inch display, slightly larger display on the Z Ultra. And in terms of the resolution, the Sony Xperia T2 Ultra has a 720p HD display, whereas the Sony Xperia Z Ultra has a 1080p HD display. And in terms of the PPI, we get a 245 PPI on the Sony Xperia T2 Ultra versus 342 PPI, almost 100 more PPI than the Sony Xperia T2 Ultra. Looking at the software, both devices comes with the Android 4.3 with Sony's own Timescape UI. In terms of the weight on both devices, we get 172 gram of weight on the T2 Ultra versus 212 gram of weight on the Z Ultra. And in terms of the waterproof and dustproof, the Z Ultra is waterproof and dustproof, whereas the Sony Xperia T2 Ultra is not waterproof because it is a budget device. In terms of the thickness, the Sony Xperia T2 Ultra is a little bit thicker as compared to the Z Ultra. It is at about 7.65mm, almost 1mm above than the 6.5mm on the Z Ultra. In terms of the processor, we get a Qualcomm Snapdragon 400 processor on the Sony Xperia T2 Ultra versus a Qualcomm Snapdragon 800 processor on the Sony Xperia Z Ultra. And basically, both processors are quad-core, but the processor on the T2 Ultra is a cheaper one. It has a 1.4 GHz frequency, and it is not that much faster as compared to the Snapdragon 800, which is a quad-core processor clocked at 2.2 GHz. And in terms of the GPU, we get an Adreno 330 GPU on the Sony Xperia Z Ultra versus a Adreno 305 GPU on the Sony Xperia T2 Ultra. Looking at the RAM on both devices, we get a 1GB of RAM on the Sony Xperia T2 Ultra versus a 2GB of RAM on the Sony Xperia Z Ultra. Looking at the storage on both devices, we get a 8GB of internal memory on the Sony Xperia T2 Ultra versus 16GB of internal memory on the Sony Xperia Z Ultra. And in terms of the storage expansion, both devices comes with the micro SD slot options, which supports up to 32GB and 64GB. In terms of the camera on both devices, we get a 13 megapixel camera on the Sony Xperia T2 Ultra versus a 8 megapixel camera on the Sony Xperia Z Ultra. Now, the T2 Ultra has a LED flash, whereas the Z Ultra has no LED flash. And in terms of the video recording, both cameras are capable of recording 1080p HD video at 30 frames per second, and both have front-facing camera. The Z Ultra has a 2 megapixel front-facing camera versus a 1.3 megapixel front-facing camera on the T2 Ultra. Looking at the battery on both devices, we get a 3000 mAh battery on the Sony Xperia T2 Ultra versus a 3050 mAh battery on the Sony Xperia Z Ultra. So there you go, guys. This was the comparison of specs between the Sony Xperia T2 Ultra versus the Sony Xperia Z Ultra. Hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and if you do, then please give this video a thumbs up. And if you have any questions, then feel free to comment down below, and I will see you in my next video. Peace out.